Image this. You walk into a room full of successful people, everyone networking, exchanging business cards, making sure they're seen and remembered. Meanwhile, there's one person sitting quietly in the corner, barely noticed, seemingly invisible. Society would call this person a failure. Alan Watts would call them enlightened. Because here's what nobody tells you. The desperate need to be remembered is the very thing destroying your peace, your authenticity, and your power. Right now, as you're watching this, you're probably carrying an invisible weight. The weight of needing to matter, to be significant, to leave your mark on the world. You post on social media hoping people remember you. You work harder, hoping your boss remembers your contributions. You try to be more interesting, hoping friends remember your presence. But what if I told you that this entire game you're playing is the source of your suffering? Alan Watts understood something that most people spend their entire lives running from. The person who needs to be remembered is enslaved by other people's opinions. The person who embraces being forgotten becomes truly free. And that freedom is so powerful, so threatening to how society operates, that they've programmed you from birth to fear it. Stay with me, because by the end of this journey you'll understand why the most liberated human beings in history were the ones nobody remembers. And more importantly, you'll discover how embracing your own insignificance might be the most powerful thing you ever do. Let me ask you something that's going to make you uncomfortable. When was the last time you did something purely for yourself without wondering how it would look to others? When was the last time you made a choice without calculating how people would perceive you? Alan Watts would say you're living what he called the skin-encapsulated ego, the illusion that you're a separate self that needs to prove its worth to the world. Most people spend their entire lives building monuments to themselves, career achievements that scream, "Notice me." Social media profiles that demand "Remember me." Relationships that plead, "Validate me." But here's the trap nobody warns you about. The more you need to be remembered, the less authentic you become. Because you're no longer living your life, you're performing for an audience that doesn't actually care. Think about the last time you shared something on social media. Was it because you genuinely wanted to share it? Or because you needed the validation of likes and comments? Watts called this the fundamental confusion between the map and the territory. You've confused the performance of your life with actually living it. You've mistaken the symbols of success for actual fulfillment. And in that confusion, you've lost something precious, the ability to simply exist without needing approval. Here's what's really happening. Every moment you spend worrying about being remembered is a moment you're not present in your actual life. You're so busy curating your legacy that you're missing the only thing that's real, this moment right now. Watts understood that we suffer because we're constantly trying to be something other than what we are. We want to be memorable, when memorability is just another form of imprisonment. Walk through any city, and you'll see them. People desperately trying to stand out, to be different, to be remembered for something. The entrepreneur who can't stop talking about his startup. The artist who needs everyone to acknowledge her genius. The influencer who measures his worth in follower counts. And they're all running from the same terrifying truth. Most of what you do will be forgotten. Most of who you are will fade from memory. And that's not a tragedy. That's liberation. Alan Watts spent his life teaching people about the wisdom of insecurity. The idea that our need for certainty and permanence is what creates our suffering. And nothing represents this need more than our obsession with being remembered. Think about it. What are you really afraid of when you fear being forgotten? You're afraid that your life doesn't matter, that you're not special, that you're just another person who came and went without making a difference. But Watts would ask you, why does your life need to matter to others? Why isn't it enough to simply be alive, to experience this incredible mystery of existence without needing to leave a permanent mark on it? The person who needs to be remembered is saying, "I'm not enough as I am. My existence only has value if others acknowledge it." But the person who embraces being forgotten is saying, "My existence is complete in itself. I don't need external validation to justify being alive." Here's something that will change everything. Alan Watts discovered through decades of studying Eastern philosophy that the self you're trying to make memorable doesn't actually exist. Not in the way you think it does. You believe you're a separate, independent entity moving through the world, collecting experiences and achievements that define who you are. But Watts understood what the Buddha taught thousands of years ago. The self is an illusion, a convenient fiction we tell ourselves to make sense of the flow of consciousness. Think about who you were 10 years ago. Same body, roughly. Same name, definitely. But are you the same person? The thoughts that defined you then have changed. The beliefs you held have evolved. The relationships that seemed permanent have dissolved. The goals that consumed you have been replaced. So which version was the real you? The answer is none of them, because the you that you're trying to make memorable is constantly changing, constantly flowing, constantly dying and being reborn, moment to moment. Watts called this the eternal now, the understanding that the only thing that's real is this present moment. Everything else, your past achievements, your future legacy, your carefully constructed identity, these are mental constructions, stories you tell yourself about who you are. And the more you invest in these stories, the more you suffer when they don't match reality. The person desperate to be remembered is clinging to a story about themselves that they need others to validate and perpetuate. But the person who embraces being forgotten has seen through the story entirely. They've realized that the self that wants to be remembered is just another thought arising in consciousness, no more permanent or significant than the thought of what to eat for breakfast. Let me tell you about something that happens to everyone who truly understands this. There's a moment. Watts called it the moment of awakening, when you realize that you've been living your entire life for an imaginary audience. Every choice filtered through what they might think, every action calculated for how it might be remembered, every moment sacrificed on the altar of future significance. And in that moment of awakening, you realize the audience was never really there. The people you thought were watching and judging were too busy worrying about their own performance to pay attention to yours. The legacy you thought you were building matters to no one but you. The memory you thought you'd leave behind will fade just like everyone else's. And here's what's incredible about this realization. It's not depressing, it's liberating. Because once you understand that being forgotten is inevitable, you're finally free to stop performing and start living. You're free to make choices based on what genuinely feels right, instead of what looks impressive. You're free to pursue interests that won't make good stories at dinner parties. You're free to be ordinary, unremarkable, forgettable. And in that freedom, you discover something that everyone chasing remembrance never finds: actual peace, genuine authenticity, real presence in your own life. Watts used to tell a story about a Chinese farmer that perfectly illustrates this. The farmer's horse ran away. His neighbors said, "That's terrible, such bad luck." The farmer said, "Maybe." The next day, the horse returned, bringing wild horses with it. The neighbors said, "That's wonderful, such good luck." The farmer said, "Maybe." His son tried to tame one of the wild horses and broke his leg. The neighbors said, "That's terrible, such bad luck." The farmer said, "Maybe." Then war broke out and they came to conscript young men. But the farmer's son was spared because of his broken leg. The neighbors said, "That's wonderful, such good luck." The farmer said, "Maybe." The point of this story isn't about the unpredictability of life. It's about the farmer's relationship to his own experience. He's not trying to make his story impressive. He's not worried about how people will remember these events. He's simply present with what is, without needing it to be anything more than what it is. This is what being forgotten allows you to do. When you're not performing for posterity, you can respond to life directly, authentically, without filtering everything through the lens of how you'll be remembered. The farmer doesn't need validation. He doesn't need significance. He doesn't need to be remembered as the wise farmer who said maybe. He's complete in himself, and that completeness comes from not needing to be anything other than what he is. Most people never reach this understanding because they've been conditioned since childhood to believe their worth depends on being recognized. Your parents praised you when you achieved things. Your teachers rewarded you for standing out. Your peers respected you when you had something impressive to show. And slowly, inevitably, you learned that your value as a person was tied to being noticed, acknowledged, remembered. But Alan Watts would say this conditioning is a trap that keeps you from experiencing what you actually are. Not a separate self that needs validation, but consciousness itself, temporarily taking the form of a human being. And consciousness doesn't need to be remembered because it's already everything. It's already complete. Think about it this way. When you're deeply engaged in something you love, truly absorbed in the activity, where does your need to be remembered go? When you're lost in music, or creating something, or having a genuine conversation, or experiencing beauty, you're not thinking about your legacy. You're not worried about being forgotten. You're simply present, simply alive, simply being. And in those moments, you're experiencing what Watts called your true nature. Not the constructed self that needs recognition, but the awareness that's experiencing everything, including the constructed self. Here's where this gets really interesting. The people who actually end up being remembered are usually the ones who weren't trying to be remembered. They were too busy actually living, actually creating, actually contributing to worry about their legacy. The artists who changed culture were painting because they had to paint, not because they wanted to be remembered as great painters. The scientists who revolutionized understanding were pursuing questions because the questions fascinated them, not because they wanted their names in textbooks. The philosophers who shaped human thought were exploring ideas because the exploration was meaningful, not because they wanted to be remembered as great thinkers. And here's the paradox that Watts loved pointing out. The moment you stop trying to be memorable, you become more genuinely yourself. And being genuinely yourself is the only thing that's actually worth remembering. But by then you don't care about being remembered anymore because you've discovered something better than recognition. You've discovered presence, authenticity, the direct experience of being alive without needing it to mean anything more than it already does. This is why the people who achieve genuine peace are often invisible. They're not trying to stand out. They're not building monuments to themselves. They're not worried about their legacy. They're simply here, fully present in their lives, content to exist without needing external validation to justify their existence. Society fights against this understanding with everything it has, because a person who doesn't need to be remembered is a person who can't be controlled through the promise of recognition. Think about how much of the economy depends on your need for significance. The entire self-help industry promising to make you more memorable, more impressive, more worthy of recognition. The education system training you to compete for grades, awards, acknowledgement. The corporate world dangling promotions and titles as rewards for good behavior. Social media platforms literally designed to feed your need for validation through likes, shares, and follower counts. All of it depends on you believing that being remembered matters. That significance is something you achieve through external recognition. That your worth as a person is determined by how many people know your name. But Alan Watts saw through this entire system. He understood that the need to be remembered is how society keeps you compliant, productive, and controllable. Because as long as you're chasing recognition, you'll do what they want you to do. You'll buy what they want you to buy. You'll believe what they want you to believe. You'll perform the role they want you to perform. And you'll never stop to ask the most dangerous question of all. What would I do with my life if I didn't need anyone to remember me? That question is terrifying because answering it honestly requires you to strip away every layer of performance, every carefully constructed identity, every goal that's really about impressing others. And what you find underneath might not be impressive at all. It might be quiet, simple, ordinary. You might discover that without the need for recognition, you'd live a much simpler life. Smaller ambitions, fewer achievements, less drama, more presence, more peace, more genuine connection with the few people who actually matter. Alan Watts called this voluntary simplicity, the understanding that most of what we pursue is just elaborate distraction from being present with what is. We chase success because we're afraid of the emptiness we might find in stillness. We build impressive resumes because we're terrified of being ordinary. We create carefully curated social media personas because we can't bear the thought of being invisible. But the person who embraces being forgotten has faced that fear directly. They've looked into the supposed emptiness of insignificance and discovered it's not empty at all. It's full of the only thing that's real, the direct experience of being alive right now, in this moment, without needing it to be anything other than what it is. This is what Watts meant when he said we're not going anywhere. We think life is a journey from birth to death, with the goal of accumulating achievements and recognition along the way. But Watts understood that existence isn't going anywhere because it's already here. The future you're trying to secure your legacy in doesn't exist. The past you're trying to be remembered for is gone. The only reality is now, and now doesn't care about your legacy. Let me show you what happens when you truly internalize this understanding. You stop living for tomorrow's validation and start living for today's experience. You stop choosing based on what will look good and start choosing based on what feels genuine. You stop performing strength and start being vulnerable. You stop curating an image and start showing up as you actually are. And something remarkable happens. The relationships that survive this transformation are the real ones. The people who stay are the ones who see you, not your performance. The work that remains meaningful is the work you do even if no one ever noticed. The life that emerges is your actual life, not the one you thought you should be living to be remembered. Watts would say this is when you finally wake up from the dream of separation. You realize you were never separate from existence itself, never really needed to prove your worth, never actually required external validation to justify being alive. You were always part of the infinite dance of consciousness experiencing itself. Your individual story, impressive or not, remembered or forgotten, was always just one tiny wave in an endless ocean. Here's what nobody tells you about the people who achieve genuine peace. They're not the ones with the most impressive achievements. They're not the ones everyone remembers. They're not the ones with the biggest followings or the most recognition. They're the ones who stopped playing that game entirely. They're the elderly person in the garden who's genuinely content tending plants nobody else sees. They're the artist creating in solitude without needing an audience. They're the person at the party who's perfectly comfortable not being the center of attention. They're invisible in a world obsessed with visibility, and that invisibility is their superpower. Because when you're not performing for others, you can finally be present with yourself. When you're not worried about being remembered, you can fully experience being alive. When you're not building a legacy, you can actually enjoy your life. Alan Watts discovered this through his own journey. Despite becoming famous, despite being remembered, he understood that the recognition was irrelevant to the actual experience of existence. His teachings weren't about making yourself more memorable. They were about realizing you don't need to be memorable at all. He spent his life pointing people away from the pursuit of significance and toward the direct experience of being. And the ultimate irony is that by teaching people to let go of the need to be remembered, he became unforgettable. Not because he tried, but because he stopped trying. Think about the greatest moments of your life, the times when you felt most alive, most present, most genuinely yourself. Were you thinking about your legacy in those moments? Were you worried about being remembered? Were you performing for an imaginary audience? Or were you simply here, fully engaged with the experience, without needing it to be anything more than it was? Those moments of pure presence, that's what being forgotten allows. When you're not burdened by the need for recognition, every moment can be that free, that real, that alive. You can have a conversation without calculating how you're coming across. You can pursue an interest without justifying it to anyone. You can make mistakes without worrying about your reputation. You can be ordinary without feeling like you're failing. And in that ordinariness, you discover something extraordinary. The simple miracle of being conscious, of experiencing existence, of being part of the infinite dance of reality. That's enough. It was always enough. You just couldn't see it because you were too busy trying to be memorable. Alan Watts used to say that the meaning of life is just to be alive, not to be remembered for being alive, not to achieve something impressive while alive, just to be alive, to breathe, to experience, to participate in the mystery of existence without needing to understand it, or control it, or be recognized for it. This is what being forgotten gives you back. The simplicity of just being here, the freedom of not needing to justify your existence, the peace of knowing that your worth isn't determined by how many people remember you. And here's the beautiful truth that emerges from this understanding. When you stop trying to be memorable, you become more genuinely yourself. When you stop performing, you become more authentic. When you stop chasing recognition, you become more present. And ironically, that authenticity, that presence, that genuine self, those are the only things actually worth remembering. But by then you've realized that being worth remembering isn't the point. Living fully, presently, authentically, that's the point. Everything else is just noise. So what does this mean for how you actually live your life? It means you stop making choices based on how impressive they'll sound when you tell people about them. It means you stop accumulating achievements to prove your worth to yourself and others. It means you stop curating your image and start being honest about who you are. It means you stop measuring your value by external recognition and start finding value in the direct experience of being alive. Watts would say this is when life stops being a problem to solve and starts being a reality to experience. You're no longer trying to become something memorable. You're simply being what you already are. Consciousness experiencing itself through your particular perspective. And that experience doesn't need validation because it's already complete. The sunset is beautiful whether anyone remembers you saw it. The conversation is meaningful whether anyone knows it happened. The moment of peace is real whether anyone acknowledges you achieved it. Your life is valuable because it's being lived, not because it's being remembered. This brings us to the ultimate question. What would you do differently tomorrow you truly accepted that being forgotten is inevitable? Would you still chase that promotion? Would you still post that carefully crafted update? Would you still stress about your reputation? Would you still sacrifice your present peace for future recognition? Or would you do something different? Would you have that honest conversation you've been avoiding? Would you pursue that interest that doesn't fit your image? Would you spend time on what actually matters instead of what looks impressive? Would you finally let yourself be ordinary, forgettable, free? Alan Watts spent his entire life trying to wake people up from the dream of significance. Not because significance is bad, but because the desperate pursuit of it keeps you from experiencing the only thing that's real. This moment, right now, whether anyone remembers it or not. The person who needs to be remembered is living in fear, constantly performing, never at peace. The person who embraces being forgotten is living in freedom, fully present, genuinely themselves. Your worth doesn't depend on recognition. Your value isn't determined by memory. Your existence doesn't require validation. You're already complete. Already enough, already part of the infinite mystery of consciousness experiencing itself. The only question is whether you'll let yourself experience that completeness or keep chasing the illusion of significance. Alan Watts knew that being forgotten isn't the worst thing that can happen to you. Living your entire life for an imaginary audience, that's the worst thing. Sacrificing your present peace for future recognition, that's the tragedy. Dying without ever being fully alive because you were too busy performing, that's what you should actually fear. Being forgotten just means being free. Free to be yourself without apology. Free to live without performance. Free to exist without needing to justify that existence to anyone, including yourself. This is the gift that embracing insignificance gives you back. Not the burden of building a legacy, but the lightness of simply being here. Not the pressure of making your mark, but the freedom of leaving no mark at all. Not the exhaustion of constant performance, but the rest of genuine presence. And in that rest, that presence, that freedom, you discover what you were looking for all along. Not recognition, but reality. Not memory, but meaning. Not significance, but simplicity. The simple miracle of being conscious right now, in this moment, without needing it to be anything more than it already is. That's what Alan Watts understood. That's what being forgotten allows. That's what your soul has been trying to tell you beneath all the noise of needing to be remembered. The truth is, you've been carrying this weight of significance for so long that you've forgotten what it feels like to exist without it. You've been performing for so many years that you don't remember who you are when no one's watching. You've been building a legacy for so long that you've forgotten to build a life. But none of that weight was ever necessary. None of that performance was ever required. None of that significance was ever real. It was always just a story you told yourself, a role you thought you had to play, a game you thought you had to win. And the moment you see through it, the moment you truly understand that being forgotten is not only inevitable but liberating, everything changes. The pressure dissolves, the anxiety fades, the constant need for validation quiets. And what's left is you. Actually you, not the performed version or the curated image or the carefully constructed identity, just awareness experiencing existence through your particular perspective. And that's enough. It was always enough. You just couldn't see it through all the noise of trying to be memorable. You're reading these words right now, and something inside you recognizes this truth even you're afraid of it. Part of you knows that the desperate scramble for recognition has been exhausting. Part of you senses that there's freedom in letting go of the need to be remembered. Part of you wants permission to stop performing and start being present. This is that permission. This is your invitation to stop carrying the weight of needing to matter to others and discover that you already matter simply by being alive. The game of significance is rigged because the goal keeps moving. The validation never lasts. The recognition never satisfies. But the experience of being present, being genuine, being free from the need for memory, that's real. That's available right now. That's what Alan Watts spent his life pointing toward. Not achievement or recognition or being remembered, just being. Just this. Just now. And in that simple presence you find what everyone chasing significance is actually looking for. Not immortality through memory, but eternity through presence. Not significance through recognition, but meaning through direct experience. Not a legacy that outlasts you, but a life that's fully lived while you're here. Your true nature doesn't need to be remembered because it's not separate from the eternal now that's always here. Your authentic self doesn't require validation because it's already complete. Your existence doesn't need justification because existence itself is the miracle, not what you achieve during it. Alan Watts called this the wisdom of insecurity, understanding that letting go of the need for permanence and recognition is what finally gives you peace. Not the false peace of accumulated achievements, but the real peace of being present with what is. And that peace, that presence, that freedom from the need to be remembered, it's been available all along. You just had to stop chasing significance long enough to notice it. You're still here, still reading, which means part of you is ready to explore what being forgotten actually offers. The freedom to make mistakes without protecting your reputation. The space to be vulnerable without performing strength. The permission to be ordinary without feeling like you're failing. The ability to pursue what genuinely interests you without needing it to be impressive. The power to connect authentically instead of strategically. The relief of showing up as you are instead of who you think you should be. That's what awaits on the other side of releasing the need for memory. Not emptiness, but fullness. Not insignificance, but authentic meaning. Not being forgotten by others, but finally remembering yourself. Take a moment right now, drop the performance and write in the comments, "I embrace being forgotten." Watch how many people join you in claiming this freedom that society has trained everyone to fear. This declaration isn't about giving up. It's about waking up to what actually matters beyond the exhausting game of recognition. Your willingness to admit this truth publicly becomes a beacon for others trapped in the same performance. And together you create permission for authenticity that our culture desperately needs, but constantly suppresses through its obsession with being memorable. Subscribe and give this video a thumbs up because sharing this message creates ripples that help others discover the same liberation you're finding right now. And your engagement tells the algorithm to spread this perspective to people who need exactly this reminder that their worth isn't determined by how many strangers remember their name tomorrow. The next video we're creating goes even deeper into the illusions you've been taught to believe about yourself and reveals the one realization that changes how you experience every single moment of your existence. And once you see what we're about to show you, your entire relationship with your own consciousness transforms in ways that make today's revelations seem like just the beginning of understanding what you actually are, beneath all the stories and performances and desperate attempts to matter.